We like to think of it as inline developer self-service. So what you'll see is that we declare resources as close as possible to where they're needed, and we use human readable English to do those declarations with common sense requests for permissions. So you can see here, I want a bucket, I call it images. There's no ARN or unique locator that's needed to find those resources at runtime. We use a project specific name, and that just has to be unique within the project. And then that will be automatically translated at runtime to the unique resource locator, like an ARN in AWS. And then we ask for common permissions like reading, writing, deleting, which then translate into IAM roles and policies that provide the common best practice ways of giving that level of access. For example, if I ask for reading permission to a bucket, that will let me read files and list the files in the bucket as an example. And the equivalent permissions exist in the other clouds. In the next step, we also look at how we create APIs, which is, I'm really of the mindset, and our team really is as well, that either your spec should generate your code or your code should generate your spec, but not both. Whenever we get into the situation that we're doing both, things get really out of hand. And we've just taken the approach at Nitric that because we're generating so much from code, we'll generate the spec too. So what you're seeing there is we're declaring an API, and we can declare routes against the API, and that will automatically generate an open API spec. So, the newest version of Swagger, in order to deploy to API gateway or equivalent services in other clouds using those specs, we can output them as well. And then the last thing I'll talk through is a little bit about how Nitric works. So you'll write that application code. The Nitric CLI can then run the code in a deployment mode, which doesn't actually execute any of the runtime code. It just deals with all of those resource declarations and API definitions and so forth. And it outputs two things. It puts out a generic resource specification, so what all the cloud resources are and how they need to interact for it to work, and container images for every entry point into your app. Now that could be every single function in your app is a different container, or you can have one big container with your whole app in it, maybe like an Express.js application or something like that. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And then at the provider layer, when we go to deploy to a cloud, we wrap those images in a layer that adds the translation, and we inject the various runtime code that's needed to interact with the actual cloud resources. It's a super lightweight runtime.